The screen flickers. Candles on the charts burn like tiny warnings. My hand hovers over the mouse. But I don't move, not because I'm frozen by fear, but because I feel completely empty. The market is alive, buzzing with opportunity, yet I am dead inside. I've lost everything that once made me believe I could do this. And in that moment, I ask myself a question that chills me to the bone. What if I quit and there's no coming back? Trading had been my escape, my obsession disguised as control. The first wins were intoxicating, like discovering a secret code that only I could decipher. But soon, the wins vanished, replaced by losses that whispered doubts into every corner of my mind. Bills piled up. Expectations pressed on me like a weight I could not lift. I was married. Responsibilities weren't just numbers on a screen. They were real, looming, unforgiving. And yet, even with the stakes higher than ever, my greatest enemy wasn't the market. It was me, my fear, my impatience, my ego. Tonight, I would discover just how close I had come to destroying everything I had worked for. Before we dive deeper into the story, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't miss the twists, the lessons, and the shocking moments that reveal the hidden side of trading psychology. The screen glowed in the dark room, casting pale light on my tired face. Charts flickered like restless ghosts, each candle rising and falling with a rhythm I had once thought I understood. But tonight, it felt alien. I wasn't seeing patterns or opportunities anymore. I was only seeing failure. It began with a small loss, almost negligible, a mere fraction of my account balance. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just one trade. But that tiny loss grew like a crack in ice, spreading, widening, until suddenly the whole surface felt unstable. And then came another loss, and another, and suddenly, I realized I wasn't just losing money. I was losing confidence. Hours stretched into nights. The hum of my laptop became the soundtrack to my anxiety. My hand hovered over the mouse, but I didn't click. My mind raced in circles, replaying every trade, second-guessing every decision, imagining all the ways I could have done it differently. Every would have felt heavier than the last. Outside the room, life continued as if nothing had changed. Bills demanded attention. Family responsibilities loomed like silent alarms. I was married, and the financial pressure wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Every decision carried weight. Every failure echoed in the quiet spaces of our home. I tried to smile at my spouse, tried to act normal in conversation, but I could feel the cracks forming in my composure. My internal world was in chaos, and no one could see it except me. And then the thought started. Quiet at first, almost polite. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you're not cut out for this. Maybe it's time to quit. At first, I pushed him aside, blaming the market, blaming the timing, blaming everything but myself. But the whispers kept coming. They grew louder, persistent, impossible to ignore. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. If I quit now, it wouldn't be because the market had defeated me. It would be because I had surrendered to my own fear. Fear, I learned that night, is a subtle predator. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps into your mind, disguising itself as rationality, logic, self-protection. And when you're not paying attention, it paralyzes you completely. I could feel it wrapping around me, suffocating every spark of excitement I had once felt for trading. I tried to rationalize. Just take a break. Rest. Tomorrow will be better. But my mind refused to rest. Every pause felt like procrastination. Every hesitation like failure. The market doesn't wait. It moves. It punishes the timid. And yet, my own hesitation was worse. My indecision became a trap I couldn't escape. I remember staring at the charts and realizing that the lines, the numbers, the candles, they were mirrors. Mirrors reflecting my own insecurities back at me. The patterns I had studied for months no longer seemed meaningful. They were just shapes moving randomly. My confidence shattered, my skills questioned. Every strategy one had painstakingly learned seemed useless in the face of my own doubt. And then the isolation hit. I felt completely alone in that room. Friends, family, mentors, no one could feel the panic coursing through me. No one could feel the hollow pit opening inside my chest every time a trade went wrong. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away from the charts, the money, the responsibility. But I couldn't. I couldn't escape myself. The thought that terrified me most was simple. What if I quit and there's no coming back? Not just quitting trading, but quitting the part of me that had dared to dream, to risk, to imagine something bigger than my current life. It wasn't just money on the line. It was my identity, my courage, my sense of possibility. And in that darkness, I saw clearly for the first time. The market hadn't broken me. I had allowed my fear, my impatience, my ego, and my doubt to do the damage. If I want to survive, not just as a trader, but as a human being striving for something greater, I would have to confront these shadows inside myself. But that confrontation didn't come that night. That night, I almost quit. I shut my laptop slowly, the flicker of the screen dying out like a dying heartbeat. I sank back in my chair and let the silence wash over me, letting the fear seep into every corner of my mind. It was the lowest point, the moment before the turning. But even in that despair, there was a seed, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark, that whispered, this isn't the end. Not yet, because I realized then that surrendering to fear was the real danger. And if I could survive this night, I could survive anything. The days that followed were a slow descent into a battlefield I couldn't see. The enemy wasn't a chart, a trend, or even the market itself. The enemy was me, my mind, my impulses, my doubt. Every trade became a war between what I knew I should do and what my fear insisted I couldn't. I tried to stick to routines I had written down in desperate attempts at discipline. I created schedules, checklists, trading rules, all the tools I had been taught would bring control. Yet, the moment I executed a trade, something inside me snapped. Doubt clawed its way back in, whispering, maybe this won't work. Maybe you're missing something. Maybe you're making a fool of yourself. It wasn't just a thought. It was a voice that grew louder with every tick of the market, growing stronger than any logic or training I had. I would watch a trade that I had carefully planned, fully prepared, and yet I couldn't press the button. Minutes turned to hours, hours turned to hours of inaction, and by the time I finally acted, the opportunity had vanished, leaving me with nothing but regret and a small but persistent gnawing feeling of incompetence. Outside my room, life marched on. The world was unaware of the storm inside me. I was married, living a life that required attention, energy, and focus, but my mind was trapped in an endless cycle of anxiety. Bills demanded to be paid, responsibilities weighed down my shoulders, and financial pressure mounted. Yet the most pressing weight was invisible. It was the pressure I placed on myself, the self-imposed expectations that had turned into chains. I began noticing patterns in my own behavior that I had never confronted. The hesitation before every trade. The irrational hope when things went slightly my way. The crushing despair when they didn't. Each reaction, no matter how small, revealed something deeper, a vulnerability I had ignored. Trading was no longer about predicting the market. It was about predicting myself, about understanding the shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. Every loss, even small ones, became amplified in my mind. I would replay them endlessly, imagining the different choices I could have made. I began to see that it wasn't the market punishing me. It was my own fear, magnified by doubt, that caused the real damage. And when I recognized this, the horror set in. I was fighting a war I didn't even know I was capable of winning. I started journaling, writing down every trade, every thought, every irrational fear. At first, it felt meaningless, a futile attempt to externalize chaos. But slowly, the pattern emerged. I could see the cycles I was trapped in, the hesitation, the impulsive decisions, the moments where ego and fear collided in devastating ways. Awareness became the first weapon I had. Seeing the problem outside my mind made it tangible, and tangible problems can be solved. But clarity brought no immediate relief. It revealed the depth of my struggle. Nights became longer, sleep fragmented. I would wake up in a cold sweat after dreaming of mistakes, losses, and failed trades. I questioned myself constantly. Am I cut out for this? Am I wasting my life? Will I ever get it right? I realized that the market was a reflection of life. The fear, impatience, and doubt I felt trading were the same forces that sabotaged every goal I had ever tried to achieve. And that realization was terrifying. It meant that even if the market cooperated, I could still fail. My real battle wasn't external. It was internal. But there was also a strange liberation in this awareness. If I could master the mind, I could master the market. If I could confront my own fear, I could confront anything. And yet, knowing what had to be done didn't make it easier. Every trade, every decision became a test of mental fortitude. Even small missteps felt catastrophic. I tried different approaches. Meditation, micro habits, focusing on small wins, journaling, self-reflection. Some days it worked. Other days it didn't. I was fragile, human, vulnerable, and I had to accept that as part of the process. And then came the most haunting thought of all. What if this fear never leaves? What if I'm trapped in this cycle forever? The darkness felt endless, suffocating. Yet somewhere in the chaos, a tiny spark remained. The awareness that even in the deepest struggle, growth was possible. The struggle itself was the teacher. I realized that my breakdown wasn't the end. It was the doorway, a doorway into understanding myself, into understanding the true nature of trading, risk, and life. The journey through this darkness was painful, exhausting, terrifying, but it was also essential. By facing my shadows, I began to see possibilities. I began to understand that the key wasn't to eliminate fear, but to coexist with it, to act despite it, to acknowledge every doubt and make choices anyway. It was in this recognition that the first threads of transformation began to weave themselves. That period of relentless internal struggle laid the foundation for what was about to come. I didn't know it yet, but the day I almost quit was not a failure. It was preparation, a trial by fire that would forge resilience I desperately needed. And without it, the next chapter could never exist. The turning point didn't come with fanfare, alarms, or sudden clarity. It came quietly, in the dead of night, when the room was dark except for the faint glow of my laptop. I wasn't waiting for a market signal, a new strategy, or a miracle. I was waiting for myself, the person I had lost somewhere along the way. I sat back, closed my eyes, and asked the questions I'd avoided for months. Why did I start trading? What do I truly want from this? How far am I willing to go to get it? The answers weren't immediate. They came slowly, almost imperceptibly, in whispers between my breathing, in the pauses of my thoughts, in the silence that stretched longer than any candle could burn. I realized that I had been trying to control everything externally, the trades, the charts, the numbers, when the real battle was inside. The fear, the doubt, the ego, those were the real enemies. I had been fighting the wrong war. And in that realization, a strange calmness began to settle over me, like the eye of a storm. The next day, I started small. Micro habits became my foundation. 1 focused hour of study, 10 minutes of reflection, logging every trade, every thought, every reaction. I rebuilt my system not with new indicators or strategies, but with discipline, structure, and mindfulness. It was tedious, painstaking, and yet it was working. Slowly, I began to reclaim control over my own mind. I learned to observe my fear without succumbing to it. A trade that once would have paralyzed me now became an exercise in awareness. I feel fear. I acknowledge it. I act anyway. That mantra repeated itself silently in my head during every tick of the market. Every decision, once clouded with panic, now carried a newfound clarity. And then came the first trade that mattered. Not for profit, but for what it proved. I entered a position with full awareness, conscious of my fear, prepared for the possibility of loss. The trade moved against me briefly, as all trades do, but I stayed disciplined. I didn't panic. I didn't deviate. And then it moved in my favor. A small win, yes, but more importantly, a victory over the internal storm that had haunted me for weeks. That night, I realized something profound. Resilience is not about never failing. It's about returning again and again despite fear. It's about staring at the abyss and taking the next step anyway. The market had not changed. I began documenting everything, not just the numbers, but the emotions, the thoughts, the whispers of doubt that had nearly broken me. I shared my journey openly, not to display success, but to illuminate struggle. I realized that transparency, honesty, and vulnerability were as much a part of trading psychology as charts and strategies. And yet, the transformation wasn't immediate. Old habits resurfaced. Fear returned like a shadow, creeping along the edges of my mind. But now, I had the tools to recognize it. Journaling, reflection, discipline, mindfulness, they became shields, not crutches. I could act without being paralyzed by the ghosts of past mistakes. I also began to understand that trading is not just about money. It's a mirror for life itself. Every fear, every hesitation, every irrational thought revealed something about how I approach challenges outside the market. By mastering my internal landscape, I could navigate life with the same discipline and resilience. This period of reflection and conscious action marked a shift. I didn't just regain control over trades. I regained control over myself. Decisions that once felt terrifying now carried a quiet confidence. Losses that would have crushed me before became lessons, data points, stepping stones. I had discovered the real purpose of trading psychology, to confront your inner fears, understand them, and act despite them. And then came the subtle but undeniable shift in perspective. Success was no longer measured in account balances or profits. It was measured in presence, clarity, and the ability to navigate fear with courage. Every micro decision, every deliberate pause, every conscious action became a victory in itself. The first week of this new approach ended not with a huge profit, but with profound realization. The market tests nothing more than what already exists inside you. Fear, doubt, impatience, those are not external forces. They are mirrors. And when you master them, the market ceases to terrify you. By facing the shadows within, I had uncovered a power I didn't know I possessed. A power not of strategy, not of technical skill, but of consciousness, discipline, and resilience. It was a realization that even in the darkest nights of doubt, there is a path forward. A path that begins not with a trade, but with a single step toward understanding yourself. And as I sat there, looking at the charts with a calm mind and steady heart, I understood. The day I almost quit wasn't the end of my story. It was a threshold, a doorway into mastery, not just of trading, but of self. And once you step through that doorway, there is no turning back. I survived the day I almost quit, but survival was never the real victory. The real journey had only just begun, a journey that would test every fear, every doubt, every shadow I had ever tried to ignore. The market hadn't changed. Life hadn't changed. Only I had. And that was both liberating and terrifying. Because the deeper I go, the more I realize that the true challenges aren't external. They're hidden in the quiet corners of the mind, waiting, watching, testing your courage, patience, and resolve. Tonight, as I sit in the darkness once more, charts glowing softly in front of me, I sense it, a force, a challenge, a moment that will push me further than I've ever been. Will I rise, or will the shadows finally take hold? I don't know yet, but one thing is certain. The story isn't over. The market whispers, the night waits, and the next test is coming, whether I'm ready or not. And when it comes, you'll want to see what happens next.